from Sibu, Sarawak. I am the author of the Iban Dream series, Iban Dream, Iban Journey and Iban Women. I've also written 2 children's books. One was published by Scholastic Singapore called The Laughing Monster, and the other is The Nanobots and Other Short Stories published by Oyers Books in Kuala Lumpur. I love telling stories. I have loved reading them since I was very young, but I was never trained to be a writer when I started writing. You see, like most people, I made the mistake of thinking that writing is just like reading, that it'll be simple, it'll be easy, you just need a good idea and everything will flow smoothly. But based on my experience these past 10 or so years, I've realized that writing is not simple because there's a lot of process. In order to make your writing sound smooth and easy and simple, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot easier to make your writing sounds difficult and hard, but then the problem is that readers will not read through your work if you do it like that, because if it becomes too difficult for them, they'll stop. And the reason for that is stories are supposed to entertain, and we as writers, we must never forget the fact that we are supposed to entertain our readers. We should never expect our readers to try to learn from us. They are not there to learn anything. It's not a lecture. It's a form of entertainment. And if you can teach them about your own culture through these stories, then all the better. And I've come up with quite a number of techniques that I've used to introduce my culture. Now, I didn't start writing because I wanted to teach about the Iban culture. I started writing because I love Iban stories, and that is a very important distinction. Because if you love the story, then you will know what part of the story is entertaining. But if you want to teach the story, your story will end up becoming textbook-like and very predictable. And this is where it tends to bore readers. So if you want to keep readers interested in what you are telling, you must also believe in the story that you are telling, in the sense that you must think that it's interesting. There are a lot of problems writing about local stories. I mean, the main problem is what you feel about local stories personally. Because usually when we learn about local stories, it's through the oral traditions. Like in the Iban's case, I will read books that have been written in the oral sense, in the sense like they are a recording of some other storyteller's story. And the problem with that is it's quite boring. It's quite simplistic because you have one fellow wants something and then he gets it or he don't get it, and that's it, right? So usually when we look at our own local folklores, we'll tend to think like, oh, this is too simple, it's not interesting enough to be a novel. But what we forget is that a lot of these stories are simple because they don't have the rich details of our culture. And the reason they don't have that is because everybody who listens share the same culture. You know exactly what people are eating when the storyteller says, and then they sit down to eat. He doesn't have to describe the food. He doesn't have to describe the process of the cooking or the process of collecting of the food, because he knows that you know. So it's a waste of time for him and for you as the listener. So if you plan to write it into a novel, you have to find all these rich details to make it more interesting. You see? And then another problem is we think like, the story is so simple. But if you look at the basic storyline of every amazing story in the world, all of it starts with a very simple plot. Somebody wants something and they get it or they don't get it, and then how do they feel about it? Everything, all of those plots are simple. It is how you make it interesting is based on your own skill and your own love for stories. Because the more you love stories, the more you want to learn, and the more you learn, the more skill you have. You see? So when I started writing Iban Dream in 2004, when I started writing it seriously, I thought that would be the one and only book that I'll never write another book about the Iban Dream series, because I was thinking like, there's not much to tell. But it had turned into 3 books. And out of that 3 novels have also come other short stories and a children's book that is just based on the Iban culture. And you see, the more you write about your own culture, the more you want to know it. The more research you do, the more ideas you get. And I believe that research is extremely important in my case, because when you're writing about your own culture, you take everything for granted. For example, like a very simple example is like, when we Ibans, when we come home from overseas, say for example, or when we go to the longhouse and step into the longhouse, the first thing we must do is shower. You know, we just take it for granted, like, oh, it's just something that the family does. But actually, when I went into the research work, I found out that it is in fact a very important part of the Iban culture. It is a part of being polite to the people who live in the place. In the sense like, you don't come into somebody's house smelling sweaty and covered with dust and mud from traveling and all that. So when you come in, you must shower. And I add in this detail into my children's book, The Laughing Monster, when he first went to Singapore and his mother told him to shower, and she explained the reason for it. So these are the small details that you can add into your local stories. But the thing is, if you want to find all these details, all these small cultural habits and details, you must look at research work. Now, why do I say you must look at research work? It's because research work forces you to look at things you never consider. You know, for example, like why do people dance this way? Why do they play their music this way? Or why do they cook their food a particular way? And what are the resources available for them? For example, like they use bamboos to cook their food, and then how do they do it? You know, so research work is very important. There are many places you can find research materials in Sarawak. We are very blessed because a lot of our history and culture have been recorded for more than 100 years. So we are very blessed here in Sarawak. You can even go to the website of the Sarawak State Library to find the Sarawak Gazette in ebook form. You can read them there for free. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic resource. And then for my Iban research, whenever I'm in Kuching, I'll drop by the Tunjuka Foundation. You know, they have a very nice library there. You can also buy reference materials. And then if you're Chinese, you should visit the Chinese Chamber of Commerce in your areas, because if the one in Sibu is an example, they will have a lot of these personal memoirs and journals, not just of the famous Chinese, but of Chinese who have, you know, make diaries, make notations of their experiences here in the local area. For example, in Sibu, it's their experiences in Sibu. They will have records of those in the Chinese Chamber of Commerce. And when I first visited, I was so disappointed that I couldn't read Chinese. You know, imagine all the boxing and sword fighting stories I would have come up with if I can read those diaries. But that is for another time. And also another group of people you can look up are teachers or pastors and ulamas, because usually they would have a personal library. You know, the retired ones are best. Those who have materials from the 60s, from the 50s, even from the 40s, because these libraries tend to have out-of-print books that will be very difficult for you to find somewhere else. And maybe if you're lucky, they might even have a record of their experiences during that time. So you can look through those to get ideas. Now, there are some style of local storytelling that may get in the way of non-local readers, international readers especially. Because when you're writing in English, there is already a particular set of rules for how you can help your reader understand what you want to say. It's just like when you're on the road, you have road signs pointing here and pointing there, you have zebra crossings, you have the traffic light. Those are all international symbols. And in writing, even though we are we all know the English language, but the way we interpret is different. You know, we have our own vernacular way of interpreting the same language. So when you want to start writing like English novels for the international market, my advice is to find out what are the road signs, what are the guidelines for how to write in English for the international market. If you're writing for the local market, it's okay. You can just use your own vernacular for the local market. That is no problem at all. See, and another thing I want to mention about oral stories is that they are repetitive. You know, they will say the same name over and over. They will repeat the same situation over and over. And the reason for that is because a lot of these local stories start out as oral stories. So in a setting where an oral story is told, you have a big group of people and you have one storyteller in front there who will be telling the stories. And he has to tell the same story to everybody, you know, from toddlers to somebody who's in the 80s and the 90s. So he must repeat those words because he's speaking to a very wide demographic. You see? And that is necessary because people get distracted. You know, in a setting where you have a lot of people get distracted. The children don't understand what is going on, so you have to keep repeating the words to them, or else everyone will lose the thread of the story. But when you are writing, it's a different matter because you have one reader and you write for a specific demographic, and that reader will have good memory and good concentration. I mean, that is one of the basic traits of a reader, right? Good memory and good concentration. So if you keep repeating ideas, it will bore them. So it's not a good idea to use the oral style of storytelling, even though you feel like it's more traditional. Because if you're writing for a sophisticated market, you must write in the style that they are willing to accept. Because remember, stories are supposed to be entertaining. They're not supposed they're not something that you have to sit down and read and understand, and that it's up to the reader to try to figure things out. No, you can't do that for stories because it's not a textbook. They're not learning. There's no teacher to guide them. So you can't force them to try to learn something. However, you can teach them things about your culture through small little micro stories. I mean, for example, when I've started writing Iban Dream, the first thing I did was a lot of these cultural, details and explanation, because I was trying to make people understand my culture first. The problem with local story is that if the person who reads it does not understand your culture, a lot of the behavior, a lot of the mannerism doesn't make sense. Because a lot of things happen culturally, so it doesn't make sense. So you need to explain those things to them. And I spent like almost 2 years, trying to describe the details. But then after a while, I began to realize this is more of a textbook. I don't want to write a textbook. I want to write a story. So I struggled quite a long time about how I should do it. I started studying a lot of my favorite writers and tried to figure out how they do it and why they do it. And I realized after a while that the best method for me was to start with a scene of what was going on. So if you read Iban Dream, in the first few paragraphs of the first chapter, it will talk about a pig being sacrificed. So my micro story at that point was about the sacrificed pig. What happened to the pig after it was sacrificed? What happened before it was sacrificed? And through that small micro story, I explained how animal sacrifices are being used by the Ibans. Why do they sacrifice animals, and how they believe it will help them. And I use that micro story. So if you plan to write your novel, your first novel, please don't start with too much details. Start with something that your reader can see inside their mind. Don't start with things like words that describe, like this is why we do this is why we do that, this is how we live. Don't do that, because that is something they cannot imagine visually, you see. So it's just like, for the first few pages, all they see is like this blank space inside their head. So that's not a good idea. The best idea is to try to find something visual that their mind can focus on, to keep their mind occupied, say, you know. And then the other advice I want to give is to write your story based on a theme. You know, don't try to put everything into that one story, because it will be very confusing. Use a theme. For my Iban Dream series, I use the theme of weaving. The reason I do that is because my great-grandmother was known to be a very good weaver, so I thought, you know, in memory of her, just write the story based on the poem. And how I use it is that, for example, if I'm describing colors of the sky, of flowers, of plants, or even of blood, when Bujang goes out and had her. You know, when I describe them, I use the word dye. I always compare the colors to the type of dyes that the Ibans would use. For example, like the indigo dye, the red dyes, the yellow dyes. You know, and I would refer to the plants they use for the dyes. So in that sense, my readers will have a sort of pivoting point. So you may have a lot of things going on around here, but the center is the weaving theme. So they will always go back to the center whenever I'm describing something. So in that way, you don't confuse your reader. Say for example, you're an Iban writer and you are more familiar with laws and legalities. Maybe then you can look at your theme from an adat standpoint, you see. Because my love for local stories is based on fantasy and folklore. Whenever I talk about the adat, I will use weaving words to describe it, and I will also look at it from a folklore point of view, from a fantasy point of view. You know, like what are the folklores about the adat? That's what I'm going to be talking about. So for a lawyer, say, he may not be comfortable writing about the fantasy version of the adat. Maybe he can write about the legal version of the adat, like the historical meeting, the bawang, we call it the bawang besar, bawang miat, you know, based on the historical meetings, you see. So there are many ways you can approach it, but my advice is please approach it in only one style. And it's not a good idea to try to dilute everything. It will confuse you and it will confuse your reader. And in the end, you both lose. You know, you work too hard to try to cover everything, and your reader works too hard trying to understand everything. So it's not a good idea. So keep to a theme where it's possible. And another important point I want to make is, please write about a culture you are familiar with. You don't have to know everything about a culture. You need to be familiar with it, because then you'll sense whether something is right or wrong for your culture. Even if someone says, no, this is what we know about your culture, you know, you will sense whether it is right or wrong. For example, like when I was growing up, I have a lot of non-Ibans who tell me like, oh, the Iban culture is so jijik. I mean, the guy can visit the girl in her room, you know, ngayap and all that. But when I talk with my grandparents about it, they're relaxed. And I mean, people don't really want to talk with their children or grandchildren about all this relationship stuff, so I can't really get a lot of information from them. But because I could sense the conflict inside me between what people are saying and how my grandparents react to it, I can sense that something is not right. So I went out and researched it. And what I found out is that, as is practiced now also, is that Ibans don't like to sleep alone. Number one is because they believe in the antus, in the demons and spirit, and they feel like if you're alone, this thing can come and disturb you. So when a man say ngayap to an Iban woman, she will never be alone. She will be chaperoned. You know? She will have a sister with her, or she will have a cousin sleeping with her. You see, so she's not alone. So there is no way anything hanky-panky can go on. You see, and number two is that the man before he ngayaps, he must sort of hint it to the girl's relatives and find out whether the family is willing or not to have him visit the girl. The reason he does that is because in the Iban adat there is a rule that says that the owner of a bilik can kill anyone who trespass his or her home. You know, and there will be nothing wrong. So if you are considered as someone who is not part of the family, and you go into their bilik and they find you, they have a right to kill you. That is the adat. So before the man goes and visit the girl, he must make sure first that his visit will be welcome. And then the third reason they have that ngayap custom is because Iban communities are usually very small. Most of the time they are related through marriage or through blood, you know, and even if they have somebody new coming in, it will be because a woman or a man had brought that person in. So if a young bachelor, a young strong bachelor who can be a sentry, who can be a guard, who can be a warrior for them, if he is publicly rejected by the girl, he's going to be ashamed and he's going to move to a different house. So that's why the custom started, so that the man need not be publicly rejected. And I think for myself personally, most importantly, the girl will not be pressured to choose a man she does not want. So it sort of gives the girl the right to choose her partner. And when I look at that custom from that point of view, I begin to realize that, oh, this is a very good custom for a small community, especially, you know, especially a warring community. It keeps, warring communities are prideful, are filled with prideful people. So it sort of helps people maintain their pride. Which brings to another interesting custom about the Ibans is that if you happen to embarrass yourself, like for example, spill your drinks, made a mistake or trip or anything, everyone suddenly look away. Yeah? They will suddenly look away. They will pretend they didn't see it. They will pretend they don't know. Because we are such a prideful community that when somebody made a mistake, we assume that they will not want to be embarrassed. So we will pretend that nothing happened. You see? So that is one interesting aspect. And then another reason you need to be familiar with your culture is that it helps with your research in the sense like you know what to look for. For example, I know that the Ibans collect their salt from nipa palm. You know? Now, if I didn't know that fact, the natural thing would be to say that they go to the coastline, right? To the Sarawak coastline, to the sea, and to try to get water from the sea, to try to extract salt. You see? But because I know that they go for the nipa palm, I don't have to come up with all these new ideas of new equipment and new gadgets for them, you know, to extract salt from the sea. What I do is I just go to a search engine online, you know, type in how to get salt from nipa palm, and then I will have the process. So then all I need to do is just to put a story into the process. I don't have to recreate anything. So that is the advantage if you are familiar with that culture. So you know how exactly they do certain things, and you know, and you can find out the process. So don't feel like, don't think that just because you didn't grow up in that culture. For example, like I grew up in town, I didn't grow up in a long house. So there are a lot of things about longhouse life that I don't know. See? But because I am familiar with the people and I am familiar with my cousins, with my grandparents, and the way that they live, I know what to look for. I know what questions to ask. Because when you are writing, what questions you ask is as important as what answers you know. Because what you know is what you know, but what you don't know is what are the questions to ask. It's like the case of the nipa palm and the salty seawater. You know, it's a difference of that. So it's a lot easier if you write from a culture you're familiar with. And just because something feels familiar to you does not mean that it will not feel exotic to somebody else. You see, so I would encourage you to explore it, and I guarantee you that you will enjoy it. Okay? And your knowledge will help you in a lot of other ways. Your knowledge will help you stay out of trouble. That is the first thing that you have to do. Because just imagine you take years to write a novel, and you print it, you go publisher, you print it, and then somebody come to you and say, this is wrong, that is bad, that is denigrating. So what do you do then? You see? However, if you are familiar with the culture, you don't have to worry about that, because you know where all those sinkholes are. You know how to avoid them. You know how to avoid those traps. Because the thing about the Iban culture especially is that we have had so many people write about us. You know, foreigners especially. Some of them, they write novels. I mean, in the late 19th century especially, there's a lot of sensationalist writers. You know, they write about things that sort of seems apparent because it is going on. For example, like headhunting, you know. But headhunting have their own taboos also. You just can't go out and just simply headhunt. No, we don't do that. But then because of that idea of headhunting, people started writing a lot of sensationalist story, and of course the story of the Ngayam. You know, a lot of people misunderstood it, and they start writing stories that denigrate Iban women. So because of all these problems, sometimes, like for example, like in my case, I come into this unique situation where people come to me and say, your information is wrong because we read from somewhere else that this is the case. Then I will have to explain to them why I write my story the way I wrote it, and I will have to explain to them about how my culture was sometimes misrepresented. And I'm lucky to live in this generation because this is the generation where we became more aware of ideas like misappropriation, misrepresentation. So we are lucky in that sense, you know. So we can do the corrections that we need to do for our cultures, you know, for the sake of our descendants, for the sake of posterity. Now, your knowledge will help you with things like taboos and superstition. And you can actually use these taboos and superstition for dramatic effect in your stories. For example, like one taboo for the Iban is that when you're digging a grave, you cannot step into the grave. That's why the old Iban graves are actually quite shallow, because they don't step into the grave. They believe that if you step into the grave, you will die. So they will dig the grave from the side, and they will make sure that the grave is exactly the size of the casket they're going to put inside. Because they believe that if the hole is too big, it means that somebody else in the family is going to die and be buried next to the deceased. So that is one Iban taboo that I use quite a bit in my stories. For example, like in Iban Journey, I made the protagonist Nuing dig a hole, and then I made him lie in the hole because he was so depressed that his best friend was killed. You see, so he dig the hole, which was meant to bury his friend's arm, but then he lay inside the hole because he wanted to die. So you can use those sort of taboos to dramatic effect. You can, having knowledge will also help you differentiate between a myth character and a story character. Because sometimes from the outside it can be difficult when you're looking at this. In my case, because I'm writing fantasy, so the myth characters are living and breathing. For example, like the Pasun, the hunting dog of the demon huntsman. I mean, most people will say, oh, maybe it's a story character. It is a story. It's a story character. But in Iban culture, it's a myth. In the sense, like, we still believe that when it rains and the sun is out, there's no cloud in the sky, on a clear day, if it rains, we believe that the Pasun will come out. We still do that. We still believe that. So, if you are familiar with your culture, then you'll know the difference between a myth character that you can use as a living, breathing character in your story, and a story character that you can only put in dialogue. For example, like in the Iban culture, we have the clever tortoise, which is actually our version of the Malay Sang Kancil. You know? So for something like the tortoise, I will use it as part of a dialogue, as part of a story. And talking about on the other extreme, it will also help you know what mythical character you must never use in your story. You know, there are. I mean, in the Iban culture, we have quite a what do you call it? We are actually quite permissive in the sense like we allow the creator to have artistic freedom. You know, for example, we can use a god character like Senggalang Burung, like Sempurai, or Pulanggana. We can use them in our stories. We can make them do things in our stories. However, there is one line I will not cross. I will not use Patara, who the Ibans believe as the god of all. I will not use Patara as a living, breathing character in my stories. Because I feel like if I cross that line, it will be sacrilegious. You know? Because there are some lines you cannot cross. So if you are familiar with the culture, you will know the difference. You know? And that is really important to keep you out of trouble. Let me see. Knowledge will also help you use cultural symbols. Now, for example, the most iconic cultural symbol of the Iban is the tattoo rosette, the rose. So some have 5, some have 8, some have 6, so it depends on the philosophy of whichever group you are in. I wanted to use a symbol for the headhunter, which is like a tenggulun, like a ring or a dot on the hand, that's all you see. But then, the bungai terong is so iconic that I cannot avoid it. The bungai terong is actually a symbol for the traveler. So I use it in Iban Dream, but I don't refer to it directly as the symbol for the headhunter. I just sort of mention like almost all headhunters have that symbol. That's all I do. And the other thing about the bungai terong is that nowadays you will see some youngsters having it, but then they will have one like at the neck. I've seen one at the neck. I've seen one on the arm. If you are not familiar, you would think that it's okay, but actually it's wrong. It's the wrong placements of the tattoos. The bungai terong must always be in pairs. Whether it's on your shoulder or whether it's along your back, it must always be in pairs. It must not be in an odd number. Because the role of the bungai terong is to help the traveler carry his basket. So, if there's only one, that means the basket will be lopsided. The weight of the basket will be lopsided in a sense. So knowing and understanding those symbols will be important in your stories. And you can also use it as part of your story. For example, like in Iban Dream, Bujang got his first tattoo from a demon spirit that he was hunting. And then after he killed that spirit, he got a second tattoo from Segala Bulu. It's like, so in that sense, instead of saying that he went to a long house and he got both tattoos at the same time, I use it as part of the story to show that he got one first and then he got the other. He got one from a demon and then he got another one from a god. So it sort of balanced out. So he has two tattoos to show that he will be traveling for most of his life. You know, and then when you write your novels, as like what I've mentioned in the theme, right? You focus on the theme, but you also need to know where your passion for the story lies. You know? For example, do you love the Iban culture because of their language? I wouldn't be surprised if there is somebody out there who can write an English novel about the Ibans just based on poetries, you know, just using poetical words. I won't be surprised at all. You know, I've seen so many wonderful work out there. But you need to be able to, you need to focus on one thing. And my love was for folklore. I've always loved Iban folklores. I've always loved the heroes. I always love it when they go out and do fantastic things. And I always love the women who are stubborn and who stick to their guns about certain things. So I find all of those characteristics extremely fun to write. See, that's the idea. You must enjoy yourself when you're writing, because writing is like such a long and tedious process. I mean, Iban Dream alone took me like 2 years to plan, and then another 4 years to write, and then another few more years to try to find a publisher, because it was such a new idea that most publishers deem that it's too niche for them to carry. You see, so it is a process that you must enjoy. So in order to enjoy it, you must find what are the areas you are passionate about, what areas of the culture you are passionate about, and then write from that perspective. Because if you don't, then you're going to give up after a while. It's very easy to give up writing, especially your first book. Nobody cares. Number one, nobody cares. Number two, nobody understands your vision, you see. And if they don't understand, they're not going to help you. They don't know how to help you. So you are all alone until you finish that first book. And usually you'll be alone for some years until you get a publisher who believes in your work. And after that, of course, it's easier. But even then, every time when you write a new story, you have to do it alone. You know, because when people start coming in and giving you ideas, it will not work because your characters are so different. His character is different, my character is different. So I can't use their ideas into my story. You know, the best they can give me is feedback. Like, for example, I like your story, I don't like your story, I don't understand this. You know, I think you need to make this clearer. You know, the most that people can do is give you feedback. You can't expect anything else from them. So it's going to be a very lonely process. And the only way to finish that process is to find a way to enjoy it. Of course, there are also other aspects that you need to think of. Like, for example, like how do you connect to your non-local readers, to your international readers? English, yes, we may speak the same English words, but the way we use those words may be different. The way we explain things may be different. So how do you make sure that you can connect direct with your readers? You know, one thing I find, well, is very basic, of course. All humans are the same in the sense like we have 2 arms, 2 legs, you know, a pair of eyes, I mean, 1 nose, 1 mouth, a pair of ears. We all have that. So that means that we share the exact same language for our senses. In the sense like when you taste something sweet, it means I will taste something sweet too. But of course we will react differently. If you like sweet food, you will enjoy it. If I don't like sweet food, I will not enjoy it. So use the senses to give the basic ideas. For example, like the sense of smell. When you smell something, either it makes you go or it's you know. So you can link the reaction of the character to the information from his senses. That's why symbols are usually very powerful, because we all see the same symbol, but we react differently to it. Some people will feel patriotic when they see a symbol. They will feel like megah when they see a symbol. But then on the opposite side, some people may be scared when they see a symbol. For example, like when you see a police car, you might feel safe or you might feel scared. It all depends on your upbringing. You see, so then you have these 2 points where you can connect. In the sense, like you can show your reader what is happening, and then you can tell your reader how your character reacts. And based on that, your character can make up their own opinion. For example, I made up this sentence. Okay, now everybody knows that durian smells very strong, right? Now, for most people who don't like durian, they will not like the smell. It gives me a headache, it smells horrible and all that. But you want to show 2 characters who absolutely love durian, so how do you do it? And make sure that your reader understands their point of view. So what I've written here is this. The pungent smell of durian made Tom's mouth water. He could almost taste the sweet yet slightly bitter fruit in his mouth. He looked at his horse, but the other was looking away, clearly pretending that there was no durian in his house. So you have that conflict. One fellow can smell durian in the house, and the other fellow is trying so hard to pretend that he doesn't smell it because he doesn't want to share his durian. So then, so because of this conflict between these two, your reader will sort of understand that, okay, I may not like durian, but these two really likes durian. And instead of thinking about the durian, now your reader is thinking about the conflict between them. That is the main idea of your story, the conflict. Should I share or shouldn't I? And then the other fellow is like, should I ask or shouldn't I? So then the focus becomes the conflict. I mean, these are just some of the simple ideas that you can use, in your work. And I hope you have a great adventure writing, because for me it was an absolutely thrilling few years, and I absolutely enjoy it. But if you need more ideas and tips, you can Google for Writing Tribal in English by Golda Mowe. You can download those from academia.edu for free. I put 2 ebooks out for free on writing, on how to write about your own tribal group, about your own native group, about your own people. So I hope the tips today will be helpful to you, and most of all, I hope that you will be encouraged to start writing. It does not matter what level you think you are in now, but I believe in growth, I believe in development. I did not learn to write. I was never trained to write, but I found a way to do it, and I believe that you can too. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to the end.